everyone, welcome back to Clikk Chat. Today I am excited to present you our continued conversation with violinist, educator, and trailblazer Rachel Barton Pine, one of the most iconic and versatile violinists performing today. In this episode, we dive into how she prepares for the stage and the studio, her thoughts on recording albums that speak across the centuries, and how she's giving back through the Rachel Barton Pine Foundation to empower young musicians around the world. Get ready for today's episode because it will be a masterclass in music, mission, and meaning. Hello, Ms. Pine. It's so great to have you back with us for part two, that we could dive right in on a little more of the recording side, the research aspect of albums. And I know you have an extensive discography. When you're preparing for a recording project, where does your research begin? What does that process sort of look like?
That's a great question. Well, one of the things, especially if it's standard repertoire, I love to listen to a whole variety of other people's recordings. Sometimes I go through this process more or less similarly if I'm, you know, just if an interpretation is due for checking in with. In other words, if I worked out all my fingerings and bowings, my ideas about characters, tempos, everything, and then it's been 10 years, and maybe if I've only played the piece a couple of times, I might not go through it again. But if I played it a lot of times, if I feel that I've grown as an artist, in a substantial way, then I think, okay, I should revisit all of my previous decisions. Part of that is going back to the published score and just, looking at the orchestra part, all of the markings, just looking at it with fresh eyes. And maybe reading about the composer a little bit. Presumably, I already did that the first time round, but sometimes, you're a different person 10 years on, and just reading the same information, you might get different tidbits from it, or it might spark different ideas. And then listening to a lot of recordings of people, both dead and alive, in other words, violinists from various generations of the recorded era, and maybe some live performances on YouTube. Basically, just like seeing what other people do. And usually there's enough interesting ideas that I want to try things out. Like, oh, what would it be like if I took a little time over here? Or, oh, I really liked that on the D string. I've only ever played it on the G string. Let's see how that feels. And occasionally I might steal an idea. Occasionally I'm like, that worked for them, but it really feels better for me and for my violin to do the way I've been doing it. And sometimes through this process, I come to a conclusion which is neither what my colleague did nor what I used to do, but maybe a third option that I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't been sort of going through this process. So, yeah, so listening to people, and sometimes I listen on a macro level, which is just, basics like what's the overall tempo, what's the ebb and flow, what are the characters, just kind of on that level. And then the micro level, of course, is exactly which fingerings and bowings are they using, and particularly for sort of more
Right.
lyrical sections or pieces from Romantic era or early 20th century. It might be about where are they doing expressive slides. And so, just getting all of those thoughts. Yeah, so it's really fun to do that. What's really interesting, the one repertoire I never did that with was unaccompanied Bach, because I
Uh,
feel like it's so personal somehow that listening to anybody else play was not helpful to me. Like my time was better spent playing it over and over and over and just listening to the music itself and just letting inspiration flow. But that's really the exception. Everything else, like when I did the 24 Caprices, I actually, by sheer coincidence, ended up listening to 24 different albums of them. And I put together a master playlist of my favorites of each Caprice. And what was interesting is there were very few artists who were represented more than a few times each. It really wasn't like there was anybody whose caprices I liked all of them or most of them. It's not that I didn't like them, but in terms of favorites, like, if I had to pick favorite albums, I'm sure I could, but, like for number one, it would be these couple of people, for number two, different couple of people, etc. And that was also a very informative process because certain things I'd been toying with, and then I could see how somebody else did it and decide, did I actually like that outcome or not?
right, and I know when it comes to making those musical choices, I know we've already talked about this a little bit for Bach, but maybe for other composers or genres, How do you sort of balance the historical accuracy of the piece or the composer's intentions with your own personal interpretation?
Yeah, I wish there was such a thing as accuracy, but
Yeah, that's true. It's a very
yeah, you
vague
just
term.
have to take your best guess based
Uh,
on the information of the time. And I guess it's in a way like the scientific world. We have hypotheses and then we have theories, and then some new piece of information might come along and just blow everything up, and we have to go back to the drawing board. But that's in a way that's the fun of it. And I love well, like Corelli. It was only just recently that there was an article that had sort of disseminated some of the descriptions of his playing and some sketches, drawings of him from his lifetime. And basically, they had pretty much, I would say, proven that he held his violin not on the shoulder in a modern Baroque violin hold, certainly not on the arm like the Renaissance violin hold, but kind of on the chest in a halfway in between position. And it's like, okay, that's pretty fascinating. And now
yeah,
we know this fact, and what do you do with it? And so I started experimenting with holding the violin that way. Of course, initially it was just like, what's the point? Now my left hand is all awkward and, it just feels uncomfortable. But after I kind of forced myself to do it for enough hours that I could manage it, then I started realizing that the bow arm's different relationship to gravity, with the violin slightly lower, the bow arm was slightly lower, which meant that the relationship of the bow strokes to gravity was different, and different tone colors were coming out of the exact same instrument just by being in a different location in relationship to the body. And also, even the awkwardness of the left hand, which I never did totally solve, actually gave information about what tempos felt comfortable or not, which directly impacted interpretation. So that was a really interesting case of historical information being absolutely tangible, like literally. But in other cases, you have to just balance, what you think they were doing at the time with what you feel today, because this is anachronistic, right?
yeah,
We wear deodorant and we use electric lights, and we're not going back in time. So, and also, maybe you know exactly how that artist played. Maybe it's only from 50 years ago, but you're not the same person, right? Like Shostakovich, we have a recording of his dedicatee, David Oistrakh, playing the Shostakovich concerto, playing the Cacciatorian concerto, also written for him. We don't have a recording of Joachim playing the Brahms concerto.
right.
But even though we know how Oistrakh played Shostakovich and Cacciatorian, does that mean we should just imitate him and not think any further? Absolutely not, because none of us is Oistrakh. We're each our own selves, and we have a unique and individual personality. And so we have to somehow take certain elements as inviolate, but then other things we can make our own decisions. And a really informative part of this journey of the collaboration between performer and composer has been how lucky I've been to work with a variety of living composers, and just hearing them talk about, okay, here are my intentions and me trying to meet them, but then bringing some of my own ideas to the table and seeing where the composers say, no, I want this and you got to make it work, versus, actually, I never thought of that, but that's a cool idea. Go for it. And seeing, kind of where that ebb and flow occurs. And of course, every composer is different, but working with enough, sort of quantity of composers, you start to get a sense of where those boundaries are and the relationship between what's on the page and what the composer's thoughts are, and then what your own thoughts are, and how it all, mixes together. And so now when I play something which has some issues to it, like the Schumann violin concerto, I feel like, okay, if I was with Schumann rehearsing this, I would tell him X. And based on having talked to lots of composers, he probably would say, this back to me, and then probably it would be okay if I did this. And so that's made me feel actually a little bit more free with how I might treat, dead composers, because I want to be really, really respectful and honor them. But at the same time, I think it also honors them to bring their music to life as effectively as possible. And if honoring the ink isn't going to do that in certain cases, then I actually have to honor the music, even if I'm slightly deviating from the ink, and that's the best way to serve the music and the composer.
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely very interesting to imagine a sort of a discourse with a composer of the past and yourself to make those interpretations. Yeah, definitely. And actually, moving on to sort of the concert preparation side, I read online, and it's really remarkable that you prepared the Prokofiev concerto. Was it the first concerto?
Yes.
Yeah, with the Chicago Symphony, which is 3.5 hours to prep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, what was going on through your mind, and how are you able to deliver under such intense, pressure?
Oh my goodness. So in a way, I didn't have time to get stressed. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I had actually done a series during the pandemic where I played the entire solo part of 24 different concertos, one per week, um, on so all the way through unaccompanied. It was a program called 24 and 24 Concertos from the Inside, which was kind of a play on words because obviously I was inside my apartment, but it was also getting inside the concertos.
Yep.
Um, and, I realized I was, of course, performing unaccompanied music and doing different things during the pandemic. And I realized I was really missing these concertos. And what people don't maybe think about is that when a soloist is performing a concerto, what they hear 99% of the time is their own part a cappella as they're practicing it. And then the number of hours that they're rehearsing and then performing with the orchestra is actually only a drop in the bucket. Of course, it's, 10 times more rewarding to have all the music there. But there's something really gratifying about just your part alone. I mean, there has to be, or you couldn't stand to practice all those hours. And the public doesn't get to hear the solo part without the orchestra. And I thought, oh, it'd be fun to let them hear what I hear.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't meant to be a pale substitute for the real thing. It was just supposed to be something fun and different. Of course, in each episode, I talked about the history of each concerto and my own personal thoughts about each concerto. Then I played the whole solo part through. So actually, it wasn't really my motivation for doing so, but it did end up kind of keeping all the concertos in my fingers. So I was like really ready to get back out there when lockdown lifted. And with the Ravinia performance, I had performed on this online thing. Prokofiev won like maybe 3 months prior to that. So I had practiced it fairly recently. But one of the things I've discovered over the years, and I love to tell this to young people because I think it's encouraging. It gives you hope. Um, that, at first when you're learning a piece, it's like so hard and it takes all your effort to like try to get close to conquering it, well enough that you can actually get on stage and make your way through it. And then maybe you set it aside, come back to it a couple years later, and it's definitely not where you left it. You have to work it back up again. Of course, it's easier than the first time round, but it's still a lot of work. And it kind of continues like that for years and years. But something magical happened along the way. After a certain number of decades of practicing certain
Yeah.
pieces, it's like I don't know if I passed a certain magical number of total practice hours or what it was, but there were certain pieces where I would actually come back to them after a few months or a couple of years, and they would be like pretty close to where I had left them, and I'd be like, wait, how is that possible? And then another one and another one. And there are certain pieces that haven't gotten there, but there are some where every time I come back to it now, I just know that it's going to be in my fingers and it's ready to go, and it's like no problem. I wouldn't say that Prokofiev one is one of those,
Mhm.
but it definitely, was, the practicing that I had done 3 months earlier allowed me to be able to kind of remember what all the hard spots were. Now, this was the funniest thing about that emergency gig. So I didn't even get to rehearse with the orchestra. They'd already
Wow.
played their dress rehearsal when poor Midori was rushed to the emergency room. Luckily, she was fine. Everything was okay, but she was unable to do the concert that night. But the rehearsal had already happened, so I didn't even get to rehearse with the orchestra. And the one thing that I hadn't done during this concert series on lockdown is I hadn't bothered to memorize my entrances.
Yeah.
And if it's like you play and then you've got two measures rest, and you've got six measures rest, and you've got four measures rest, and there's like all these little rests, right? And so I knew how my part went, but I didn't remember every spot to come in next. So I actually had to have the music, and I perform that concerto memorized when I have a normal concert engagement. So, but I had to have the music there because of these entrances and stuff. So instead of practicing, the first thing I did is I had to run to my photocopier machine and like the page turns are too fast to do it live. And I wasn't going to have a like a page turner sit next to me or something. So I had to like shrink it and cut and paste it and make it like so
Yes.
I could have it on the music stand, which of course I'd never bothered to do before for that piece because I perform it memorized. So that was the first thing I had to do. The second thing I had to do is my daughter was enrolled at virtual Heifetz camp, so I had to let them know that she was going to be backstage at Ravinia for her classes and I think in the car driving there for one of the classes and just let them know what was up. And then I had to try to figure out where I had stashed my large venue eyelashes because I hadn't worn those since I had last been in a large venue a year and a half earlier. And I was like, wait, where did I put them? I need them. So yeah, things a guy wouldn't have had to think about. But
Yeah.
no, and then it was a Friday, which means, and
Uh-huh.
since I live in downtown Chicago, it's like an hour and a half in rush hour traffic to get all the way up to Ravinia.
Goodness.
So I was going to be stuck in the car, and so I actually like studied my score,
Yeah.
studied my part, like tried to listen, think, do some mental practice and all of that during the car ride, and also strategize because I knew I wouldn't have enough time backstage to like practice every measure adequately. Now, normally when you're going to be practicing a piece, you go right for the hard spots and give them
Yeah.
more of your attention than all the rest of the less hard everything else, right? I actually did the opposite, and it felt so like, you know, uncomfortable, like what I'd been trained never to do my entire life. But I actually realized that what would be the point of like nailing a few hard spots and all the rest of it would be not quite secure. So I actually practiced everything except the hardest spots
Yeah.
because I wanted to make sure that 95% of the concerto would be all there. And then if the hardest spots just couldn't be, then I would just like do my best to kind of fake it and play it with flair and move on. And so, oh my gosh, I felt so guilty, but that was definitely the best choice to make that performance effective. And yeah, it was so much fun to just get out there and hear it with a great orchestra and it was the time was too short. I was definitely left a little unsatisfied. Like, no, I'm used to hearing it like 3 or 4 times by the time a concert run is over between the working rehearsal, the dress rehearsal, 1 or 2 performances, right? But yeah, certainly better than not doing it, that's for sure. And
Yeah.
gosh, I mean, I've done, 1 day sub jobs, 3 day sub jobs, etc. I don't think this would ever be beat in my time. And so next time I get called well, actually, I got a call just a few months ago
Nice.
for the Charleston Symphony. And it was, or maybe it was it in the fall. Gosh, time smushes together.
Yeah.
But yeah, Anya Kiko Myers, she lives in LA and there were the wildfires and stuff. And so she was unable to get to South Carolina to play Barber with the Charleston Symphony. So I got woken up by a phone call from my manager saying, "Can you be at the airport in 3 hours and fly to Boston and play the Barber?" So I certainly got to, have my rehearsals and then do the concert. But basically, yeah, I, jumped out of bed, packed the suitcase, headed to the airport. And then by the time 2 flights later, I got to my destination. And then it was, basically, I got there just in time to like meet with the conductor and run on stage and do the rehearsal. And yeah, but then I did get to like catch my breath practice the next day. And after that CSO thing, it felt like, oh, I have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, if that CSO thing had never happened, I would have thought that that one was
Yeah.
pretty rushed and stressful. But then, the bar has been lowered.
I mean, that lowered bar to me already sounds like a nightmare. So that's insane to hear. But
No,
yeah.
but it's fun. I mean, that's one of the fun things about our profession is you just never know what's around the corner. It could be an invitation for next week. It could be an invitation for 2 years hence, but we get to do such a fun variety of things all the time, and you just never know what's going to come your way. And so there's always an interesting new adventure.
Right. There's always something to be gained. Yeah. Well, and alongside your performance work, I wanted to talk a little bit about your foundation, the Rachel Barton Pine Foundation, and some of the projects. What was the sort of impetus for you to start your foundation? What was its origin story?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very financially struggling family. My father was employed during most of my student years, and my mother was taking care of me and my younger sisters. So it was really touch and go. Like I had scholarships for my actual lessons, and there was always a question, okay, would I get enough of a scholarship the next year and the next year? And to try to keep pursuing your dream in the face of such uncertainty is, really takes a lot of faith, I think. But in our case, the scholarship wasn't enough because scholarships cover the cost of your lessons, but it doesn't pay for your new strings or your bow rehair or the sheet music you're supposed to purchase so you can study your next piece of repertoire, piano accompanist fees, airfare to competitions, audition recording sessions. Concert clothes, so you have something to wear on stage, the gas to put in the car to drive to your lessons. All of those things are expenses that families have to pay out of pocket. And when you're struggling to pay for groceries and rent every week, it's like, how are you going to buy sheet music and get a rehair? So, thanks to various generous individuals, extended family, our church, etc., I was able to make it work, but it was always very tenuous. And I noticed that violin competitions, and I was lucky I did well in many of them, and it really did help out. But violin competitions, give the prize to whoever played the best that day, regardless of whether they intend to major in music, regardless of whether they come from a very well-off family or not. And so I thought, well, there needs to be financial assistance for kids who really aspire to a life in music and are in, particular financial difficulties. And so that was what inspired me to start our financial assistance program. And then also, of course, as a recipient of borrowed instruments for almost my entire life, including during my student years, um, I also started an instrument loan program. And yeah, it's been just so exciting. We've helped more than 100 young artists at this point, thanks to various generous donors. We have instruments that have been given to us from inheritors or from makers, from retirees. And of course, we also lend some instruments which are owned by others as investments or as heirlooms. And it's just been so nice to be able to, kind of give back and pay it forward for the help that I received. So that was the whole reason I started my foundation in 2001. But meanwhile, I had made an album in 97, which was violin concertos by Black composers from the 17 and 1800s. And not African American. People often automatically translate Black as African American, but these were Afro-European and Afro-Caribbean composers. As I always say, no Americans of any kind were writing violin concertos in the 1700s. And I recorded this album literally because I fell in love with this music and, was really, kind of as a fan of the violin. I thought, well, if there's these great pieces which are virtually unknown, really neglected, like I want to get them out there and share them with other people who love violin music. And I naively didn't even think about like, diversity or social justice or any of those kinds of things. And it was only after the album came out that I started, being invited to sit on, diversity committees, learning about issues of representation and so on. And students and parents and teachers started asking me for where they could find more of this music. And I realized that while, a lot of tremendous work was being done in academia about these composers and history, that, a lot of just everyday Suzuki teachers in some small town in USA, like they couldn't lay their hands on this stuff because most of it was in manuscript only due to historic lack of opportunity. Some of it was out of print. Even things that were in print weren't in editions suitable for pedagogical use. So in 2001, realizing that I now had a not-for-profit, I was like, well, I guess I'll do this other project too. And so I started the Music by Black Composers, and you can check out the website musicbyblackcomposers.org. We've not only published actually 4 volumes now for violin, but we also have published some piano books, music of Joseph Bologna, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges from the time of Mozart. We're about to publish our first flute volumes, believe it or not. I'm going to actually go and hang out at the National Flute Conference in August, and I'll see if the flautists have as fun parties as the string players at their conference. It's, And yeah, and we have all kinds of free resources on our website from repertoire directories to podcast lists, children's books, just all kinds of stuff. And it's been incredibly rewarding. Certainly during the pandemic, I didn't have to be bored and Netflix binge or bake or any of those other things. It was like just carrying on with the research. And yeah, and we've got a long to-do list yet to accomplish. So I won't be bored for at least a decade. But it's been really fun. I mean, of course, it's, serving humanity and serving the cause of music because, the more people who are involved in music, the more rich our art form is going to be, the more repertoire that people have to listen to, the more rewarding it's going to be for fans of music. Um, and I just love finding all kinds of beautiful stuff. If the music wasn't great, then it would be like, okay, what's going on? And it's been interesting because at first, for many years, a lot of people were kind of dismissive of the whole thing.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, people realized, wait a sec, there's a treasure trove of excellent music that we've been missing out on. Let's embrace it. Let's uplift it. Let's check it out and see which, each of us thinks are our favorites. And so now, of course, we have lots of people playing works by Florence Price and William Grant Still and many others. But now there's been this sort of backlash, like, well, are you only playing this music because it's by somebody from a certain demographic? And yeah, and it's interesting because as a woman, like, I don't believe we should play something by a woman composer because it's a woman composer, but but the flip side to that is we should give women composers an equal chance. Meaning, if you're thinking of, okay, I want to add a romantic sonata to my program, don't just consider maybe I'll do Brahms, maybe I'll do Franck, maybe I'll do Grieg. Also think, well, maybe I might want to play the Amanda Meyer sonata. And guess what? A lot of times I'm like, yeah, that's the one I'm in the mood for. But if I didn't add it to my list of options, I wouldn't play it, and that would be wrong. So I'm not playing it because she's a woman. I'm playing it because it's an absolutely great sonata. So that's really the way I like to frame it, is that you need to look at all the music and decide what you feel like playing. If I felt like playing Fauré, I wouldn't be doing it because he was a man. I wouldn't be doing it because he's white. I wouldn't be doing it because he's French. I'd be doing it because I love that piece. And that's really, the way I choose all of my repertoire. But the only difference is I make sure that I take the extra step of going out and finding what's out there by Black composers, by Latino composers, by, just a variety of composers that aren't kind of in the ether. Like, I think you would know about the Fauré Sonata if you never bothered to think about it because people in your studio are playing it, or it might come on the radio. You might go to a famous artist concert and they're performing it. You just kind of know it exists. Other things you're not going to just pick up by osmosis and you have to make the extra effort. So that's really important because, in order to best serve the cause of music, we can't really represent humanity if whole entire portions of humanity are left out of the conversation.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm actually particularly interested. What sort of responses have you seen from young students engaging with this music, especially those who might be seeing themselves represented in classical repertoire for the first time?
Yeah, well, that's what's been really, really rewarding and inspiring is, especially young African American students who feel like, I love this music, but it's somebody else's music. And then if they get one of our books and they read about the all black orchestras of the 1800s, which were the equivalent of the Negro baseball leagues, about the fact that Frederick Douglass and Coretta Scott King were violinists, and see, all of these composers that look like them from different centuries, then it's like, wait a sec, this is my music too. And I think, that's the way that they're going to be inspired to stick with it. They're going to get more positive encouragement from their friends and families, and they're more likely to be part of the next generation of professional musicians and serious concert goers. And, you know, if they just kind of fell by the wayside, then we'd be losing out on a lot of great future interpretations, on a lot of, future support, making our art form continue to exist. We need everybody to be joining in for the sake of the art, but also because this is great stuff and we want everybody to feel like they're a part of it.
Right, definitely. And well, are there any new foundation projects, partnerships, or just future volumes in the works that you're specifically excited about? Or
Well, the flute stuff has been our our big thing of late, but we do have well, it's really a to-do list. I think we call it projects or something. It's in the about section of the website, and it basically shows everything that we've done already and everything that we intend to do. And you might kind of wonder about some of the order, like why are you going to prioritize the carillon over cello? Do you know what the carillon is? Have you ever heard of that
No,
instrument?
I actually haven't.
Yeah, see? So that is the name of the instrument, which is like a little keyboard and plays church bells.
Ah,
And people can actually get a college degree in playing this instrument
oh,
and get hired by those locations that have that instrument to be the player of that instrument. It's like being a church organist, except you're a carillonneur playing the bells.
mhm,
And it's a very narrow and specific profession, obviously, but we have a professor of carillon who wants to transcribe a lot of our music and make it into a volume for that instrument. So certainly, if we ourselves were thinking of doing it, then it wouldn't be as high on our priority list next to, against something like cello, which is so much more widespread. But because somebody is volunteering, then it will get done a little sooner. And I just love the idea that these beautiful melodies by Black composers, past and present, are going to be serenading entire neighborhoods through the church bells. Such a beautiful thought. But yeah, anyway, so we've got, string quartet, we've got wind and brass instruments, we've got just all kinds of things on our to-do list, and you can kind of see what we're planning and what's going on by going to the about section of our website, and then there's a tab on there that gives you the scoop.
right. Yeah, we'll definitely post those links in our description in YouTube for everyone else to click on. Well, thank you so much again for making the time for this interview today. Again, a lot of really, really insightful information and new things I'm learning as well. So, your artistry and your advocacy, of course, continue to inspire everyone watching and beyond. And again, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed our little conversation. And
Absolutely. Well,
have
thanks
a
for
wonderful,
having me on, and
thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
you too, and I'll see you in Seattle.
Yep,
Take care.
yep. And that's a wrap on part two of our unforgettable interview with Rachel Barton Pine. From the grind of preparation to her foundation, which is the gift that just keeps on giving back, her journey reminds us that music is both a discipline and a gift. Mrs. Pine, thank you not only for your brilliance, but for your generosity and commitment to lifting others up. This has been Clikk Chat, and we'll see you next time for more conversations that connect music, mission, and the next generation.